Every season, there's a few crops that just slowly disappoint you. They survive, they keep growing, you keep tending them. But by the end of the season, you realize they quietly took more than they gave. And in a small garden, that matters. Because even if the crop kind of works, it can be the wrong choice if it needed too much attention, took up space at the wrong time, and didn't deliver what you hoped for. I didn't always notice these issues in the moment. Most of them I didn't notice until I start looking back at the harvest totals, the timing, and how I felt caring for them. So today I want to walk you through what struggled in my 2025 garden. Not just what struggled, but what I learned and how those lessons are shaping what I'll grow next. It took me months to realize all of these failures shared the same causes. Winter squash was probably the biggest disappointment of this year. I planted 5 acorn squashes, 2 butternut squashes, and based on previous seasons, I expected to be swimming in squash in the range of about 20 to 70 pounds. What actually happened was very different. I harvested just over 9 pounds, and that mostly came from 3 acorn squash plants and a tiny butternut squash. Looking back, there's a few things that worked against them. Only 3 acorn squash started to produce anything before nutrient deficiency and powdery mildew took over. The other 2 acorn squashes were planted under some of my paste tomatoes, and I didn't realize how much shade those paste tomatoes would create as the season went on. The butternut squash struggled even more. They were planted in my front yard where the soil quality is just quite poor after broccoli that I had harvested out that also didn't do very well, and they never really established. In 2026, I'm making a few clear changes. I'll be adding more compost and organic fertilizer to the planting hole, and I want to be more intentional about using liquid fertilizers early on. Treating the squashes more like seedlings that need support rather than a plant it and forget it kind of crop. I also want to spend some time improving the soil quality in my front yard because obviously it's holding multiple crops back. I also won't be planting squash under other plants again. What I wish I had done sooner was respond faster. At the first sign of any nutrient deficiencies, I should have stepped in with a liquid fertilizer instead of just letting it slide. Once those acorn squashes started producing, I wish I had treated the powdery mildew so that I could have held on to those plants a little bit longer. At that point, I think I was just frustrated with winter squash, and that frustration led me to disengage instead of troubleshoot. Winter squash taught me something about expectation. I had a very clear picture in my head on how this was supposed to go. And when reality didn't match that picture, I shut down a little bit instead of adjusting. That's something I want to work on as a gardener. Responding instead of reacting. Sweet peppers were another tough one this year. I planted 22 sweet peppers and expected about 30 pounds, enough to really make them worth the space. Instead, I harvested just under 4 pounds, and that's only because I picked some of the peppers green while they were still young. Most of the peppers rotted on the plant as they were ripening. Looking back, I strongly suspect that I was dealing with some blossom end rot. They were planted in the same bed as some of my winter squash after my broccoli harvest, and I think the soil was already depleted of nutrients. Nutrients was certainly part of the problem here. In 2026, I want to be much more intentional with fertilizing. I'll be amending the holes much more thoroughly, and I need to do some more research on how to prevent blossom end rot, especially calcium balances, and I might try some gypsum. I'm also curious if I can fortify the seedlings a little bit so that they are more resilient when they go into the ground. What I wish I had done sooner was pay attention to the fruit as it was developing. The plants themselves looked healthy and dark green, which made it easy to assume everything was fine. But the fruit told a different story, and I want to get better at reading those early signs instead of just waiting and hoping time will fix it. Cabbage was another one that didn't live up to expectations. I planted 13 cabbages, 5 in the spring, 8 in the fall, and I expected to get about 15 pounds of cabbages. In reality, I harvested just under 6 pounds, and that mostly came from my spring planting. The heads were small, but at least they were usable. The fall crop struggled very badly. They were planted in my front yard where the soil quality is not the best, and once summer hit, the pest and the cabbage moth just took over so quickly. Next season, the plan is pretty consistent. More compost, more fertilizer, and more proactive pest management. What I wish I had done sooner was proactively treated the fall crop with some BT instead of just reacting to the problem when I saw it. By the time I had stepped in, the plants were already stressed and they just couldn't recover. At this point in the season, a pattern was starting to emerge. All of these struggles weren't random. They came back to the same few things: soil quality, timing, and waiting too long to intervene. Seeing that pattern clearly is actually reassuring because those things I can improve. Snap peas were another quiet disappointment. I expected about 4 pounds, just enough for fresh eating, especially since the kids quite enjoy eating them fresh from the garden. I ended up harvesting under a pound and the plants just never really took off. I had planted my row of peas behind my garlic, and the garlic just grows quicker in the spring. So I think the garlic outpaced the peas for sunlight. And once they were shaded, the peas just never took off. Next year, I'll be planting the snap peas in a sunnier location. I want to plant more of them to get more than just 4 pounds, and I'm going to try different varieties. I also want to throw some shelling peas in the mix and see how that works in my small garden. What I wish I had done sooner was replant the peas in a sunnier location soon as I noticed that the garlic was outpacing them. A small adjustment early on could have completely changed the outcome. Zucchini was a simple but frustrating failure. I planted 1 zucchini plant and I expected about 6 pounds, just enough for fresh eating. It's not our favorite vegetable, but I do enjoy making zucchini boats during the summer. Instead, I harvested 0 pounds. The plant actually started off quite strong, but I snapped the stem trying to train it vertically. And then the seeds that I replanted never germinated because I didn't keep the soil moist enough. Next year, I'm just going to keep it simple. I'm not going to try to train zucchini vertically anymore. I've never had any consistent success trying to make zucchini trees, and this year just proved that. What I wish I had done sooner is start some backup seeds indoors. That way, when things would have gone sideways, I could have recovered quickly instead of losing the entire crop. Looking back at these crops, the failures weren't random. They came down to soil quality, competition for light, pest problems, and waiting too long to step in when I noticed a problem. I think that tracking the garden the way I do is hugely beneficial because it takes the emotion out of it. Instead of just relying on my memory, I can look back at the season and see what worked, what didn't, without beating myself up, and evaluate what's worth adjusting. Not everything needs to be fixed. Some things just need to be placed better next time. In the next video, I'll be sharing how I track my harvest and how this system makes decision-making clearer heading into next season.